The following program is a presentation of the Options Insider Radio Network. For more programs, visit www.theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio in iTunes. And now, it's time for the show that breaks down the options market. From unusual activity alerts to market updates and trading strategies. If it involves puts and calls, then our all-star panel will break it down. It's time to hit the option block. With your hosts, Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com, Mark Sebastian from optionpit.com, Mike Tusaw from knowYourOptionsInc.com, and John Grigas from Options Express.
Welcome back to the Option Block, and I hope all of our listeners are having an exciting trading week. We certainly had an exciting day in the markets to talk about, and it's nice to have a little bit of change of pace here. We usually have a up 5 points in the Dow, up half a point in the S&P day, and try to parse that. And today we actually have some interesting movement going on in the market today, and some interesting movement in volatility as well, and some interesting options activity. But before we dive into that, let me introduce my cohorts here in this fun romp through the world of options, starting off with the greasy meatball himself, Mr. Mark Sebastian. Mr. Sebastian, how are you doing this fine trading day?
I am the exact opposite of the market. I am high on life, whereas the market is sad and depressed today.
And then we're also joined by the nonstop talking machine himself, Rob Kurzakowski from Options Express. Rob, how are you doing today? And please stop. It's too much. We can't take the talk.
I'm still trying to catch my breath. I was kind of expecting almost a quiet, day after a long weekend, and walk in, and there's North African countries getting overthrown, and videos of a gaunt Steve Jobs being released, and just a whole lot of pessimism in the market today.
Yeah, not too much for a quiet one. And our listeners who are saying, where is the big man himself, Uncle Mike Tusaw? He is out on assignment today, but will be back with us later on this week. And I, of course, am your host, Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com. And now that the introductions are out of the way, let's dive right into the trading block.
The trading block.
And welcome to the trading block. This is the section of the show where we discuss what's going on in the broad markets and what caught our eye from an activity and just from a general interest perspective today. And there's quite a bit to talk about today, so let's just get started. It was a heavy moving day on the street today. S&P's closed down 27.5 handles to 1315. Dow closed down 178 points to 1212, or 12212, excuse me. And then NASDAQ closed down 77 points to 2756. And the VIX cash closed up 4.4 points to 2084. So just movement across the board today. And a lot of this was driven by just an overwhelming amount of data and events hitting the market today. We had, of course, what Mark and Rob were referring to is the wee bit of trouble they found themselves there over in Libya. Just a wee spot of trouble. And, of course, you always have to love a regime that goes on the airwaves and says, if you topple us, there'll be a civil war that will destroy our nation's oil wealth. Well, yeah, anytime we have an upstart regime there talking, obviously not domestically, but abroad, warning that their oil wealth will be destroyed if there is a civil war, then that's obviously going to send the markets into the tailspin and sending oil north, and that's exactly what we saw today. We also saw some other mixed data coming on. You saw consumer confidence coming in today at a 3-year high, which we think would be bullish. Oil hit a 2.5-year high today, and that was driven even further in the market by the fact that Walmart missed their estimates, which is never a good sign for the strength of the broad economy when our largest retailer is missing their numbers. And so, yeah, a lot of interesting things going on today. What are you guys watching with all this between the home data and Gaddafi and Walmart and oil and everything else going on? What are you guys watching right now?
What I'm watching is the Brent crude WTI spread. We narrowed up quite a bit, and and it's kind of interesting because Cushing, Oklahoma, where they deliver NYMEX crude is pretty much as full as it can get. And if this Libyan crisis really, the longer it drags out, the fundamentals should actually work the other way. WTI, because Libya is a huge supplier for European crude, you should actually keep on widening away from WTI. But of course, the pack mentality of traders, everybody is now diving into the WTI contract, which is the more liquid of the two contracts, and of course, it is the one that's traded here in the U.S. We can also see some flattening of the contango, just because those traders now start getting into diving into the front month. It is, your short-term specs are just trying to capitalize on this. They're not going to go out and be trading September or October crude right now. So we could see the spread between the Brent and the WTI crude kind of just boomerang, where we see it narrow up very quickly and then just kind of widen out at an even quicker pace once the fundamentals actually start to kick into the market. Because domestically we are really well supplied. I mean, there's no other than economic optimism, there's really nothing else driving the oil market here domestically than the weak dollar. But Brent, Europe has some supply tightness there, and what would make sense from somebody actually standing back that doesn't trade the oil market. You would expect that Brent WTI to widen out, and it's not happening.
It's interesting to watch as this unrest in the Middle East just snowballs from one country to the other. Until now, we really hadn't had much impacting major oil producers. Egypt is not really a major oil producer, and Tunisia, not really a major oil producer. But now that we're talking Libya and they're eyeing some of the other countries nearby, it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds and impacts crude going forward. I definitely don't foresee any sell-offs in crude in the near term. What about you, Mr. Greasy Meatball? What have you been watching today? I'm guessing Apple was on your radar too.
Apple, Netflix, the VIX itself, all the major indexes. I mean, we moved harder than we even did on Egypt in both volatility and in the actual price move. So they're taking this one pretty serious, and we did not get any bounce back like we did in Egypt. I mean, I think there's some people that are legitimately kind of worried about what's going on here, which, doesn't surprise me. We got a VIX trading near 21. I could see it creeping up near 25. Do I think we'll get to 40, 45? No. No, I don't. And I don't think this crisis is worthy of that. Do you? I mean, it's freaking Libya.
When they topple the Saudis, that'll be a different story. But Libya is not a VIX at 40 kind of moment, no.
Right. Like we said, when they topple a general instead of a king, or a general instead of a colonel, that's when I'll start worrying.
Yeah, you mentioned Apple. Obviously, Apple has its own events that are compounding the developments we're seeing from Libya. I don't think too many people are selling off Apple on the Libya news. I think the ghostly specter of Steve Jobs at the cancer clinic has definitely come back to haunt that name. And, of course, if you're one of these straddle buyers, then you're looking pretty good right now.
Yeah. I dumped out on my straddle the balance of it today. And for a net of about 20% on it. That's not bad for a week, don't you think?
Not bad for a week, considering not only did you not pay your decay, but you made money on the deal. That's a good deal in straddle land anytime. I'll take that any day of the week.
If I had sold, imagine if I'd sold the 365s, we would have been, when it got up to 365, I'd have been making a killing, but I did not.
If you did the kind of a broken wing type iron fly on that instead of just a straddle long,
yes.
We talked about that before, but there was not much juice in that upside. I mean, 365 was at the money, and you were long, 355 straddle?
Mm.
So, yeah, you could have hit that, I suppose. But, with iPad 2 lurking and everything else like that, it would have been a rough sell to do. And plus, like I said, the upside is not as juicy of a sale as the downside as it typically is in a big diversified name like Apple. So you would be getting pennies on the dollar for that.
And so I have to be honest, I came up with a new trade today for Apple.
By all means, enlighten us.
It's a Christmas tree risk reversal.
God.
Okay?
This is going to be a broker's dream. It's like 37 contracts.
No, it's only 4. It's only 4. And here was what I was thinking is I think Apple's going to move. Okay? And I don't think it's going to move small. So the problem is that I don't know when it's going to move. So I was trying to weigh how much vega and theta do I want versus kind of where vol is versus how much it could move. And believe it or not, Apple vol is at its highest non-earnings volatility since the flash crash, and really in the upper 80% of its range over the last year. So it's really pretty elevated right here. So here was my sale. It was sell the 330 puts, buy the 310 puts, buy the 300 puts, buy the 365 calls. Net, take in a small credit. If Apple rallies on the jobs news, you're actually going to have volatility a little bit in your favor. If we find out Jobs is really actually dying, where do you guys think Apple trades? I thought a minimum 310, possibly below 300.
Well, I think it'll break 300 easy. If they announce tomorrow that he's actually dead, you mean?
Oh, dead or dying.
Yeah, I think below 300 for sure. This is an iconic name that's linked with this iconic stock, and it's kind of like Iacocca with Chrysler back in the 80s. And
then we see volatility jump from kind of 32, 33 where it's trading up to 50, 60. The high in the last 2 years was around 60%. I think it could go higher than that if this thing tanked. So what this spread does is if vol explodes, it makes a killing. If vol tanks on a rally, it makes a killing. And actually, if we sit here, you don't do so bad. So the only area where you really lose, and I find this hard to believe with Apple, is if we crept down $2 a day for the next couple of weeks. That scenario doesn't play games. Now, it's a complicated spread because you have to be somebody that can look beyond an expiration graph and understand what you're really looking at. This is a 10-day trade. It's not a month-long trade. So it was one I was interested in. The other one I was looking at was the time straddle, which is a buying at the money put and then ratio delta neutral a more in the money put. So you'd buy a 50 delta put in the front month to get the gamma, and then you'd sell a 70 delta put in the back month. And you would do this spread 5x7, and then you'd end up delta neutral like a straddle, except for on a rally you're short vega, and on a tanking you get long vega. So that was the other spread I was looking at today. So both of the latter, the former I wrote for TheStreet.com's Option Profits team, and then the latter was just something I showed my students at Option Pit today. That is a more margin-intensive trade.
We'll have to write both of those up because I'm sure our listeners who are listening to it are like, wait a minute, did he say the 310 strike or the 330 strike?
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard thing to listen to once and be able to process. You have to kind of what you did, sit at it, look at it all day and analyze it and come up with how you think it's going to play out for you.
Yeah. The one thing I was really trying to protect myself against is sitting here, which is something that I could conceive. And that was how I constructed both of these trades. So I'm really afraid of the vega on a rally because this vega, it could easily give away. If Steve Jobs comes out and says, "Here's my medical records, I ain't dying, folks," this thing's going to be blowing through 365.
And there are a couple rumors floating around that there are some interesting developments coming out. Obviously none of them are as big as Jobs dying, but rumors that they're going to make mobile Me free and make it some sort of streaming service. Obviously iPad too and other big things. So yeah, there are things that could make this thing pop, and I think the Vega would take a big hit. Yeah,
I can actually confirm the mobile Me free because the mini metals are actually going to be in that commercial. They're kind of doing a Justin Bieber, Ozzy Osbourne thing.
You have inside track on that one, huh? Metals.
It's the mini metals and Megadeth.
I didn't realize you were their booking agent.
I'm not their booking agent. I'm just a close friend and well-wisher. I'm like one of LeBron James's 40 buddies that live in his house.
I know you do a lot of little things on the side. I didn't know booking midget metal bands was one of them. But speaking of online freebies, The other big news that hit today and hit a name that we talked about quite a bit was in Netflix. And they took kind of a 1-2 punch, not just because getting pulled down with the rest of the market, but also that Amazon unveiled their free online streaming for Amazon Prime members. And it's funny that this hit the stock so hard today, because this rumor has been bandied about for a while, and we've seen screenshots of this in like beta mode on certain select names. So I guess the fact that it actually hit today is what actually hit the stock, because the stock closed down almost 14 points, down almost 6% to 221.60. And I think I was discussing with someone end of last week of just how much premium and how much juice was in those weekly downside Netflix puts around the 200-205 strike, and now we're seeing why some of those puts are as inflated as they are, because this thing just moves like a beast. And I'm not sure if any of you guys are Amazon Prime members, but they essentially turn themselves into a basic Netflix today. They have very limited, very old titles, but it's all completely free, and I'm sure they're going to be adding more. And if anyone could take it to Netflix in the coming years, it would be Amazon.
Amazon actually makes the perfect suitor. When I actually thought about it a while back, as much as it would make sense for Apple or Microsoft or Google to buy Netflix sometime down the road, Netflix still ships a lot of DVDs, and Amazon, obviously shipping all their merchandise, has the logistics down. And as far as the online presence, integrating online media is going to be much easier from their end. Amazon Prime I think that does put some pressure on Netflix, but I can see an Amazon Netflix acquisition sometime down the road. It would make absolute sense. Amazon Prime, the one drawback of it is it's still low definition. It's a limited catalog, and if they buy Netflix, all of a sudden that catalog just goes up in size exponentially.
Oh, yeah. Now, was Amazon Prime, was that the holder of the Matrix before Optimus Prime? Just out of curiosity.
Yes, exactly. They were the leader of the Autobots, and then they became a free shipping program for Amazon. It was a weird career choice for them, but it ended up working out all right so far.
And let's not forget that Amazon has a lot of not just back shipping stuff, but back kind of storage and uploading kind of capabilities that a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah, people think of Amazon just as the company that sells you your books or your CDs or DVDs or whatever, but like you mentioned, they actually are an enormous web infrastructure company now. They run their Amazon S3 storage and services runs a lot of the backbones of a lot of the major sites on the web these days. And
including
option. Do they really?
Yeah.
And it makes sense. It's a great cheap, great infrastructure, very cheap rates. They also, if you want to open a merchant account these days, Amazon's a great way to do it. They offer a lot of these business services that the average retail consumer never sees, but that is a growing part of their business going forward. And it's interesting to see. I thought this would actually be a bit of a boon for Amazon, but they took the heat with everyone else today. They were down. Amazon closed down 6 points to 180.42, down almost 3.5%. And I was going to talk about them a little bit in the odd block, but we can just bring them up now. Netflix had an interesting day. They had it's not surprising given the downturn. They had about a 1.3 to 1 put over call ratio today. So bears were out in force in Netflix today. Also, we saw some, decent amount of net short deltas, about 317,000, which is net on the day. We didn't see any surprise. I was a little surprised to see the percentage between the puts and calls that were sold on bid and the bought on the ask to be so in line. On a day like today with the one-sided paper and one-sided movement, you think there would be a lot of people lifting offers on puts and hitting bids on calls, and we didn't see that actually, which I was kind of surprised at. Same thing for Apple, evenly spread across the board between both of these. And these are two names that did so much volume today, it's hard to pick out any one individual thing. Netflix, they do an average of 94,000 contracts a day. They did 125,000 today. Apple is somewhere in that same range. Apple did, they do about 300,000 a day. They did over 450 today. Let me get the final. They did 590,000 today. So a decent amount of volume on both. You can't really go in and pull out any one size spread. You kind of have to look at macro trends in both of these.
The one thing I would note is that in both cases, kind of that front month, and actually across many of the major indexes, that front month is really getting bid up, especially in something like Netflix, where we've seen that front month vol really, really, really price up. So it's real interesting. So just
we saw that price getting hit into the weeklies pretty early, so it makes sense that they would just translate that now. That might be a good discussion down the road for correlation between weeklies and front month, and if the models are still pricing tail risk appropriately in the weeklies versus front month, and something interesting to yeah, exactly, they're not, which is great if you're trading in those nether regions of options. But yeah, that seems to be the big stuff going on today. Oh, last news, I think Blockbuster finally found a buyer for a relatively paltry $300 million. Not
bad.
It's not bad, I guess, but it's kind of a sad denouement for a company that had a store on every block a few years ago, and now they're in receivership and they're giving away the farm for $300 million.
Why didn't Amazon go in and buy them? Here's a question for you. Forget Netflix. Why pay all that premium for Netflix when you have something that has the videos, has the shipping, has a lot of that stuff that maybe would make more sense, or would be if you had an interest in something like this, especially since they're launching this. Why wouldn't they just go in and buy Blockbuster?
I don't know how big Blockbuster is on the infrastructure and streaming end yet. I mean, Netflix obviously has that pretty down pat. They have a big system. They stream. I think I saw some stats the other day that Netflix was either in some days and popular days is like 20% of U.S. web traffic on a given day. So they got the infrastructure down pat. Blockbuster has just started to have the kiosks. They're trying to catch up with Redbox in that sense. I don't think they have a limited streaming service. One of them came with my phone that I bought a Droid X last year, but I don't think they really have. It wouldn't be the same type of play. But I do agree Netflix is absurdly priced here. If Amazon bought them, it would be a serious bit of premium to be paying for that streaming service.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what I was saying is you've got for $300 million. That's like pocket change to Amazon, isn't it?
That's the price of your option pit servers for a month. I mean, they can just throw that and then they get Blockbuster and they're good.
I'm not kidding you, man. So
numbers you guys are throwing around over there. I mean, the traffic, it's amazing they can even handle it. But yeah, so that's pretty much going to do it right now for the trading block. And with that, we will roll right into the old odd block.
The odd block.
And welcome to the Odd Block. This is the section of the show where we discuss some interesting and or unusual options activity that's lighting up the tape today. And we talked in a relatively broad perspective about Apple and Netflix already, but there were a few interesting names. I wouldn't call them particularly unusual. I just call them sizable activity today. But I saw some interesting activity in some smaller names, starting off with Iron Mountain, IRM. They closed at $26.38, down 75 cents. Yeah, this is a name that does about 1,000 contracts a day, so not a big player whatsoever. They did about 4,000 today. And what we saw is a lot of bears coming in, a lot of put options getting picked up in Iron Mountain. If you're not familiar with Iron Mountain, they are essentially a company that will come to your office and shred your documents for you. And they also do some other things as well, but that's one of their big services. And I know my wife's firm uses them quite a bit. You think that would be a very old world business model in this day and age, but there are a lot of firms that have a lot of volume of paper that need to be shredded, and they can't handle it internally. So these guys come along and made a nice little business out of it, at least a somewhat nice business that's turned against them a little bit these days. We saw some near-term bears picking up about 2,200 of the March 27 half puts. They were looks like they were purchased around $1.50 to $1.53 a pop. This is a strike that had just 10 open interest contracts before this, so this is all new opening paper. We also saw about 600 of the March 25 puts going up for 48 cents. And this is a name that has been on a bit of a downturn. They're down about 2% today and got into, they closed below their intraday low. So they closed down about 2% today. And this is a name that's just had some bad times, and now we're seeing people expecting this to the bad times to continue. I guess paper shredding isn't the boon business it once was. Yeah, being in the shredding business in this day and age kind of reminds me of being a buggy whip manufacturer around, the turn of the century, maybe 1910, 1920, when it was clear that things were going against you, and yet you continued in that business. Obviously, like I said, Iron Mountain does other things besides shredding, but it is an interesting old world type of business model that they're still working on implementing in this day and age. So another name we looked at today was Carnival Corp, CCL. This is, of course, the cruise line name. They closed at $42.09. Down nearly 8%, down $3.61. And this is one that's taking a hit with a lot of travel-related names today just because of the spike in oil. The stock was down, like I said, almost 5% at one point today. So actually, no, the stock closed down nearly 8%. And we saw, but despite the hit to the name and despite the rally in oil hitting a lot of these names, we saw a contrarian coming in on Carnival today. This guy came in, a bull actually, and he picked up quite a few of the July 47s. He picked up 3,400 of these lifting offers on virtually all of them. And about 2,600 of them were picked up for about $1.90. The rest were on various other prices, but in that same range. This volume today is pretty much doubled the open interest we've seen on this strike alone. So this is pretty much all opening paper for the most part. And this is the name that's looking for this trade looks for the stock to rebound about 15%, which is interesting given like I said, the overwhelmingly bearish tone to a lot of the paper and a lot of the trading going on in Carnival today. They have their earnings next month in March, so they have about a month to go on these before earnings come out. So it wasn't exactly a straight up near term earnings play. And not surprisingly, the vol on Carnival is up about 10 points to about 32%. So overall, like I said, this is just an interesting contrarian bet. This is a name that does about 4,000 contracts a day. They did over 16,000 today. So it was a substantial amount of paper going on in Carnival today. A lot of people looking for a turnaround of this name, which is, I think, a little bit surprising given what happened to a lot of the travel and related stocks.
Yeah. Today. Yeah. Interestingly, I'm actually planning an option cruise for next January.
Hopefully it won't be on Lake Michigan. I don't think it'll be a big turnout for that.
No, it's Caribbean. We're going on we're not taking Carnival. We're going to do Royal Caribbean. But it's a 5-day cruise, 2 days of education with me and 3 days in the sun. So it's something fun we're planning. I have to admit, I'm not usually a huge fan of Carnival cruises, but hey, some people love them. There are a lot of people that are either love cruises or hate them. I don't know. Where do you fall on that?
I'm a huge fan of Legionnaire's disease. I love my cruises. But is it Norwalk virus they're getting now in all these ships? So is this a cruise with TheStreet.com you guys are doing? Or is this like an option pit special?
It's an option pit special. It is an option pit special.
So listeners, jump now if you want to be trapped on a ship for 5 days with the greasy meatball himself. Sign up. Tickets are going quickly. And Rob, do you guys have any insight over there into Carnival before we wrap up the old odd block?
Carnival is one of those stocks that only seems to come up whenever oil spikes like it does today. We'll get a few days of action, and then it'll kind of just be business as usual. At the very beginning of the kind of the financial meltdown in 2008, it really got crushed, and then it was kind of quiet for a while. It was it's actually one of the first stocks to make some positive headway when the recovery started in the equity market. But it's one of those names that kind of comes and goes whenever there are major economic events, most notably with involving crude oil or any of that other energy products.
Yeah, it is one of those names that moves quite a bit with those. And just as before we close out the old odd block, we'll do a quick review of one we talked about a week or two ago. That is THC. And this name, we talked about some very suspicious call buying activity going on out there. And this is the name. It was thousands. I forgot how many. It was at least 10 to 15,000, if not 30,000 total of the March 7s were picked up a few weeks ago out of nowhere. It's a name that does no volume. And just as a review, the stock is hovering around a little bit below $7 right now, actually. So all that volume we saw has yet to pay off. And this guy, if he thought he had a thought he had a hot tip on something that was going to happen in the next few weeks, hasn't happened yet. The stock is down a bit. Earnings are coming up before the open on Friday, so it'll be interesting to see if this guy was actually right, if we do see a pop on Friday, if these calls actually pay off. We also saw some interesting activity today, and this is the name that does, like I said, very little volume. And we saw about 3,000 of the March 7 straddles going up today, being sold for about 35 cents. So it looks like maybe this guy is trying to unload some of his premium here, or unload some of his exposure on this March 7 strike. But in any event, the THC we talked about a few weeks ago, whether it was shady activity or not, it has yet to pop. It is closed today at $6.93. So all those March 7s, let's look at the open interest on that strike. Yeah, that open March 7 strike has almost 34,000 open interest and about 14,000 on the March 7 puts. And this is a name that, like we said, does very few contracts a day. It's a couple thousand at the most. And so this is interesting activity, one to watch. Earnings before the open on Friday. We'll see if this guy was right or if he wasted quite a bit of money on all these 30,000 contracts that he's picked up over the past few weeks. And with that, we're going to close out the old odd block and roll right into the express/spread block.
The Spread Block, brought to you by Options Express. Options Express lets you trade futures and now foreign futures too, where and when you want. From advanced charting and free daily trading ideas to automated systems trading and free educational resources, Options Express is the online broker for all traders. Visit optionsexpress.com to open your free account. Futures involve substantial risk and are not appropriate for all investors. Please read this disclosure statement for futures and options available at optionsexpress.com/futures risk or by calling 1-888-280-8020 prior to applying for an account. Options Express is a member of FINRA, SIPC, and NFA.
And welcome to the Express Block. This is the section of the show where Greasy Meatball and I sit back and we let Rob regale us with fantastic stories of what's going on over at Options Express these days. So, Rob,
we're gonna rename it the Express Block with Meatball, with Chris Kowski and the Meatball.
There we go.
Take it away, Chris Kowski. Take it away.
That's a great drive time morning radio show, I think, in the works right there. So, Mr. K, what is on the docket today?
Yeah, I think we've had a lot of traders that kind of have been burned out by GLD, making several attempts to break through new highs last year and then kind of rebounding from recent lows. And I think traders have almost given up on trying to position themselves in the market. We've seen a lot more order flow coming in as far as neutral strategies, butterflies, calendar spreads, kind of trying to peg the 137, 138, 139 level for GLD for the next couple months or next couple of expiration cycles. And obviously we've had a lot of with everything going on with crude oil. We've seen some traders actually do very well. That again with that Brent crude, WTI crude spread, and some of them may have just been taking a kind of a calculated gamble or just being flat out lucky, but you're getting the market is moving in their favor, but not for the right reasons. But then again, it doesn't matter when it's all said and done, as long as you're profitable in the end. So we've seen a lot of that, a lot of plays in commodities. Obviously, with Steve Jobs' health in question, this is the first time I can remember actually seeing quite a bit of bearish order flow coming through. Even when we had the sell-off a couple weeks ago with the initial health announcement and subsequent earnings report later on that day, it was almost like people had sold off and were just waiting to reposition, and we're actually seeing some bearish strategies. People are being cautious and not just naked writing calls, but putting on bear put spreads, some bear call spreads, and actually positioning themselves for Apple moving to the downside. I think that the video actually gave people the visual of what was actually happening with his health, and maybe it was actually a little bit worse than what people had expected.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of when he first showed up, I think a couple of years ago, at one of the Apple briefings before he had stepped down that first time, and he showed up looking completely emaciated and gaunt, and everyone was just like, oh my God, what is wrong with him? And I think these new pictures coming out again are just kind of reaffirming how despite Apple's statements to the contrary, how serious his predicament is, and what the future may be looking like for this company without its iconic chairperson for the first time in 13, 14 years?
Yeah, and he's...
Well, they did great without him. Oh, wait.
Oh, yeah, the Gil Amelio days.
Yeah.
Quality Apple stuff. Those were good days. The Newton.
the Apple IIe, I'm looking forward to the iPad 2e is what I'm looking forward to.
Actually,
so I can finally play Oregon Trail again. And where in the world is Carmen Sandiego?
Do not underestimate Oregon Trail. I believe that's one of the highest selling apps for the iPad now. This keeps coming back.
It's the best game ever.
What's more fun than getting dysentery on a regular basis?
And it's almost the same exact scenario, because back then it was the beginning of the kind of the PC/internet craze, and they really lost ground really quickly by Windows being commoditized. And I think that with Android and Windows Phone 7, and if BlackBerry can ever get their act together, I mean, Apple's in a really similar predicament where they're going to have to really innovate at a kind of breakneck speed and keep on innovating in marketing, very well to be successful. That's one of the reasons why Nokia didn't really embrace the Android platform, contrary to what many people were expecting. Is they're worried about it, Android being the new Windows, and seeing hardware manufacturers beat each other up over pricing and trimming down margins. But nevertheless, the operating system is spreading, and it's amazing to see how quickly they were able to catch up, because Apple had such a huge head start. And now, same thing with the desktop computing. Apple had that, the Apple II, and they had that huge head start, and IBM and then all the other manufacturers came in once everybody kind of got used to Windows. It's the same exact scenario. So I think that Apple is really kind of afraid of history repeating itself, but I think that they also have a better management team in place now than they did before. So it's gonna be interesting to see how that plays out. But Steve Jobs is a fighter. I mean, the guy is one of the success stories that people will bust out when they talk about the Whipple procedure, for pancreatic cancer. He's already beat a really rare form of cancer before, and I think that it's too early to count him out, but it's gonna keep Apple traders on edge for months, if not the next year or two.
Yeah, every guy I know who's still active in a market-making capacity, they've flocked to Apple in droves. It's one of the few names that can keep you busy and keep you active. And for the last few weeks anyway, if you were long a lot of premium, I'm sure most of those guys were. It didn't eat away at you too badly, so it's not a bad name to be longed. Typically, if you're long these names, you get nickel and dime to death on decay, but we haven't seen that in Apple, and in fact, quite the opposite. We've seen some good downside movement to juice up some of that vol. So yeah, Apple, it'll be interesting to see now as a company that so manages their news and so manages their PR and so manages even their market perception. Interesting to see now if maybe these rumors keep hitting the stock, if maybe they'll push up the iPad 2 announcement as to way to something to counteract it. I mean, this is the same company we saw that moved their earnings announcement to be the day after the long weekend in order to hide the Steve Jobs, kind of cover up the Steve Jobs health announcements. I wouldn't put anything past them in terms of moving news to try to give the stock a boost in the near term. You guys think that's possible, or that just me being paranoid?
Well, no, I think it's possible. The one thing that that is consistent with the management team now is they will not, say what you will, and again, I'm not an Apple user, but I don't think I own any Apple products, but they do put the finishing touches on their products. They will not rush them out to market, but they will certainly, move an announcement up. And I think that the announcement and releasing some of the specs, even though they kind of, they never officially released their specs other than, how many gigs they have and what type of screen they have. All that other stuff gets torn down by Engadget and Gizmodo and all these other sites, and that's actually when you release when you really find out what's inside the iPad too. But just the announcement, could be a positive in a way to cut the bleeding, if you will, or to stem the bleeding, if you will.
Yeah, I think with that, we have some interesting listener questions, but we're running a little bit long, so we could save those for another episode. I'm glad to see that we're getting a lot of good listener feedback on a variety of interesting topics, everything from portfolio margining to other stuff, and so they'll definitely have to save that. Maybe we'll have a dedicated segment for listener questions as these things keep coming in. And with that, we're going to close out the old Express/Spread block and roll right into Around the Block.
Around the Block.
And welcome to Around the Block. This is the section of the show where we discuss what's on our horizon for the next few sessions. And I think it's obvious what's on our near-term horizons. Everyone here is watching Apple quite intently, as well as Netflix. In terms of the economic calendar, we saw some of the big news coming out today, particularly with the housing numbers. And we also saw consumer confidence today, so not that much left on till Friday, where we see GDP rolling out. We also have new home sales on Thursday, but I think a lot of that data has already been built into the market after today. So the economic calendar is nothing super exciting. In terms of earnings coming up, we have a mixed bag of earnings. Oh, and I forgot to mention a name we've talked about quite a bit on the show in the past, Radian. They had their earnings before the open today, and the stock took a bit of a hit down, set down 37 cents to $7. This is the name that has had quite a bit of movement over the past few weeks, up to nearly 8 and back down to 7 and below 7. So if you're playing a volatile name, if you're playing their earnings, they had some interesting movements. Garmin, the maker of standalone GPS devices, they have their earnings tomorrow before they open. And I kind of get the same feeling with Garmin that I do with Iron Mountain, that they're kind of a buggy whip manufacturer these days. I mean, how long are the days for standalone GPS? When it's GPS built into everything we have with us these days, from MP3 players to phones, who needs a standalone GPS anymore? So I'll be interested to watch these just to see if the writing is on the wall for Garmin. I know they surprised last time and did fairly well, so maybe they'll be able to do it again. But interesting name to watch. GM is also coming up on the horizon. They have earnings, I believe, on the 24th before the open. And so a lot of interesting names. Like I said, I also mentioned THC, that one we talked about with a lot of unusual activity. Mm-hmm. That is on Friday before the open, so we'll be watching that one as well. What other names are you guys watching right now?
I don't think the names matter for the next couple of days. I think we're all going to be watching Libya, and that's really what's going to drive everything. If that starts looking like it's going to come to some sort of a not going to blow up the world kind of event, then I think we kind of settle down. Otherwise, I think we're heading toward a VIX near 30 if this thing really blows up. So I am not that is really what I'm concentrating on. I think even the Apple stuff is secondary to this.
I think that's, Mark pretty much hit it on the head there. I mean, it's starting to get into a really scary time here with North Africa and the Middle East, because you don't know who's going to step in. That's the problem. You don't know who's going to fill that vacuum. Gaddafi has been notoriously hostile toward the U.S. and is kind of softened in recent years, but he's certainly not a fan, and he's basically if you have this Islamo-fascist regime move in, then that's gonna really be a negative for the market. If however you get it's just like Iran's starting to get the rumblings again. If you get an even more extreme government in place, I think you're going to see oil flow disrupted. I think that a lot of those countries.
How would you get a more extreme government than Iran? Or are you talking about Libya?
No, I'm talking. Well, even Iran. I mean, there are some of the protesters who are arguing that the government's not hardline enough. In Libya, we still don't know. The Egypt situation still hasn't sorted itself out, and that's the gateway, if you will, from North Africa to the Middle East, and there things are still not sorted out there completely. So I think we still have. I think that this could really rage on for some time.
Yeah, it is interesting to see. Like I said, it is snowballing, and they had their shot with Iran last year, and it kind of petered out. It'll be interesting to see if they can catch fire again. I've been reading a lot lately about these pan-Arab groups really taking up and just moving from country to country to foment unrest wherever they can and try to topple some of these totalitarian regimes in that area. And it seems like Libya is in their sights now, but if they set their sights on Iran, that would be another significant oil producer to look at. And if between Libya and Iran, and then if they really started making noise in Saudi Arabia, what's your guess for oil if they start making rumblings in Saudi Arabia, Rob?
I mean, you can easily hit 200. It depends on if they have how quickly the takeover would be. Even if there's not even an unsuccessful coup, you can see disruptions because if you have some militant groups, they're going to go after the oil wealth first because they're going to try to starve out the government or try to cut off their funding. First and foremost, create when you cut off the funding, you cut off services, you get the people that are not already ticked off at you. So I mean that's a scenario where we can realistically see a $200 oil. We're probably not going to at this point. The Saudi military is too strong. It's too and they keep just enough people happy to prevent an overthrow. So I think that while they're not really popular domestically, they're not really upsetting a lot of people because some of the more extreme elements they still have a lot of laws in place to kind of appease them and Saudi Arabia would be kind of at the tail end of the dominoes if they were to fall. It's just like Iran. I mean, you have too strong of a military, where some of these other countries are more vulnerable because they're not really buying their weaponry from the West. They're not really stocked up. They're just they spend their money to living lavishly instead of on the military. So. If regimes were to topple, I'd say Saudi Arabia and Iran are probably last on the list of countries to actually see that. So, things are going to get. You're probably going to see oil move quite a bit before that would even happen.
Yeah, of course, the Saudis did just sign a $60 billion arms deal with the U.S., I think the biggest arms deal ever. So maybe they saw this writing on the wall a while ago, and they're starting to arm up ahead of this. But yeah, I look forward to reading the Espresso newsletter on the day that happens, Rob. Some interesting stuff going on in there. And with that, I think we're going to close out the old Around the Block segment as well as this episode of the Option Block. I want to thank all of our listeners for streaming and downloading and subscribing to this show. I want to thank all of my partners in crime for coming on the show. Starting off with you, Mr. Kurzakowski, what is coming up in the coming days and weeks on Options Express?
I think at this point we're still kind of I don't know if you've received your invitation yet for the OX Social. That beta is still coming out, and that's kind of it's kind of a group thinking, get get other traders' opinions and kind of, share ideas and share kind of model portfolios with each other with some anonymity.
Yeah, David was telling me about that. It seems really, really interesting. And yeah, I talk about your CEO on a first name basis. What about it? Huh? I'm just kidding. No, but he was telling me about it. It seems really interesting, kind of this see what the group think is real interesting. Wisdom of the masses. It's interesting. So.
Yeah, and I think that when we did it internally, I think the innovation team that brought that before the board, they actually looked at some kind of groupthink, opinions where you have the analyst's opinion of where an economic figure is, and then you have the collective group of just individual traders, and more often than not, the group of individual traders actually outperform the analysts and the so-called experts. So,
whoa! Are you saying analysts get it wrong sometimes? Next, you're going to say they're late to the party all the time.
Yeah, but it's this. It's nice. I mean, it's just a nice idea. We've seen a lot of these other services, kind of like StockTwits, kind of get to a point where they get too big for themselves, and to a point where they're getting. It's almost impossible. When it was a smaller group of traders on that, it was much easier to keep up with trader opinion. I mean, now you're just getting. It's like watching a ticker at the bottom of the screen. You're just not going to read all that and actually digest all that information. So this is a nice way to kind of scale it down.
Yeah, this is an interesting trend we're seeing from a lot of brokers these days, and kind of delve into that groupthink, that crowd-sourcing type of trading, and see what people are doing. And I agree with you that when it comes to push or shove, the actual money on the line is always a better indicator of anything than of any sort of future event than an analyst or anything else. Isn't that what the Defense Department discovered years ago when they tried to have that terrorism futures exchange, and the media exploded and killed the thing? But it was an interesting idea. By actually having some of these analysts put some money on the line, they actually think they would get better predictions out of them. But yet the world of people speculating on terrorism events took off in the media, and that was the end of that. But it was an interesting idea, and it was based on that same premise, that when people have even a little bit of skin in the game, it focuses the mind, shall we say. And Mr. Greasy Meatball, I know you have the trip or the cruise in June to sunny Alaska. What else do you have coming up?
Well, we just announced our new monthly webinar series at OptionPit.com. And every Expiration Wednesday, we're going to be offering a free 1-hour webinar for basically all comers. The first one is going to be in March, so not too far, March 16th, not St. Patrick's Day, so you're not going to be drinking and missing it. And I'm going to discuss calendar spreads and time spreads and kind of the 3 ways people can make money using them, and which ones really kind of make the most sense. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So that's the big announcement here.
You should have it on St. Patrick's Day. I'd be curious to see the kind of turnout you got and what kind of questions.
Exactly why
what kind of questions you'd receive.
That's exactly why I didn't. All right.
Spoken like a true Chicagoan, planning around St. Patrick's Day because you know better.
Yeah, thank you. So.
And of course, Uncle Mike is not here, but I will give a plug to his KnowYourOptionsInc.com. He is off. Yeah, don't forget the ink. If you go to Know Your Options, it becomes a little dark, a little blue, and maybe something you don't want to surf over to. No, actually, I believe it's a consulting company or something like that has that URL. But he's doing a webinar right now. He told me he'd give us our show a plug on his webinar. So look for that, and look for the Know Your Options Inc. guys. Of course, if you want to know more about any of the unusual activity, or you want to read Mr. Sebastian's latest thoughts on Apple's Theta, or you want to read Mr. Kurzakowski's Espresso newsletter, or any of the other fun and interesting information we have on the site, then surf on over to theoptionsinsider.com, and you can read until your heart is content. And I want to thank all of our listeners for streaming and downloading and subscribing to this show and making it such a success. And we'll see you Friday, but what will hopefully be a live show that we put together on Thursday. So we'll see you next time on the Option Block.
Do you know what nemesis means? A righteous infliction of retribution manifested by an appropriate agent.
And that's going to do it for this episode of Options Insider Radio. Be sure to visit www.theoptionsinsider.com for more episodes of this program, as well as breaking news from the options market, the latest articles and analysis from options experts, a wide variety of options education, and of course our discussion center where you can share your questions, comments, and insights with your fellow Options Insider users. While you're there, be sure to register for our monthly email newsletter, as well as our free email alert system. Our email alert system makes it even easier to stay up to date on the latest content from theoptionsinsider.com. Thanks again for listening. My name is Mark Longo, and I'll see you next time on Options Insider Radio.
Options Insider Radio was created by Mark Longo and produced by Gene Crotty. Options Insider Radio is a production of the Options Insider Incorporated, all rights reserved.